The dim, fluorescent lights of Gardena Animal Shelter cast long shadows across the concrete floor. December 15th, 2023. In the corner kennel, an 8-month-old golden retriever named Archie lay motionless, his soft brown eyes fixed on nothing in particular. A jagged scar ran down his face, a permanent reminder of the life he'd left behind. For 37 days, Archie had watched as excited families came and left with wagging companions, watched as shelter workers walked past with clipboards, their expressions growing grimmer each day, watched as the kennel beside his emptied, then filled, then emptied again. Archie didn't bark like the others. Something inside him had gone quiet the day he arrived. The shelter workers called him the Ghost, a beautiful dog, rendered invisible by his own silence. "He's next," whispered Maria, the shelter manager, to her colleague. "Tomorrow morning. We've tried everything." The words hung in the air like frost. In the harsh reality of overcrowded shelters, time was the one resource they couldn't manufacture, and Archie's time had run out. That night, a storm blew in from the east. Rain lashed against the shelter windows, and thunder rolled across the sky. The other dogs whimpered and barked, but Archie remained still, his eyes reflecting the occasional flash of lightning. Across town, in a small apartment with moving boxes still half unpacked, the Millers were weathering their own storm. Sarah Miller stared at the kitchen table where her 2 children, Emma and Jake, pushed food around their plates without eating. "I was thinking," Sarah said, breaking the silence, "maybe we could visit the animal shelter tomorrow." Robert, her husband, looked up with surprise. 6 months after losing their home in Westfield to foreclosure, 3 months after moving to this unfamiliar town for Robert's new job, and just 2 weeks after their final divorce papers were withdrawn, Pet hadn't been on anyone's priority list. "Are you sure that's a good idea right now?" Robert asked quietly. Sarah watched Emma, who hadn't smiled since leaving her friends behind. "I think we all need someone to love." Robert's eyes softened. Their marriage had nearly crumbled under financial stress and grief after his mother's death last year, but they'd chosen to fight for each other, to start again. "Okay," he nodded. "Let's go meet some dogs." Morning arrived with unexpected brightness. The storm had washed everything clean, leaving behind that peculiar stillness that follows chaos. Maria arrived early at the shelter, her heart heavy with the day's first task. But as she turned the key in the shelter door, the bell above it chimed unexpectedly. The Miller family stood there, Sarah with determined eyes, Robert with a cautious smile, and 2 children whose expressions carried a weight beyond their years. "We're looking for a dog," Sarah said simply. Maria hesitated. "Any particular kind?" Sarah exchanged glances with Robert. "Not really. We need some healing in our home. We thought maybe we could provide that for someone else." As Maria led them through the kennels, the air filled with excited barking. Dogs jumped and putting on their best performance. Jake pointed half-heartedly at a spotted terrier, her eyes scanning each cage with solemn intent. Then she stopped walking. 3 kennels back, she stood watching a golden retriever who hadn't moved, who alone among the chaos remained perfectly still. "What about this one?" Emma asked, her voice so quiet Maria's stomach tightened. "That's Archie. He's been here since November." She searched for the right words. "He's had a difficult time adjusting." Emma stepped closer to the kennel. "He has a scar," she observed, "like Dad's." She glanced at her father, whose surgical scar peeked above his collar, a reminder of the heart procedure that had drained their savings last year. Robert touched his neck self-consciously, then knelt beside his daughter. "Hello, Archie," he said softly. For the first time in weeks, Archie's ears twitched forward. "Can we meet him?" Sarah asked. Maria's hand hovered over the kennel latch. "Just so you know, he hasn't been very responsive with visitors." Nevertheless, she opened the door and attached a leash to Archie's collar. The dog rose stiffly, his legs trembling slightly as he followed Maria into the small meet-and-greet room. The family sat on the floor, creating a small circle. Archie pressed himself against the wall, his eyes darting between their faces. "Take your time," Maria said, stepping back. Emma spoke first. "He looks sad, Mom." "I think he's just scared," Sarah answered. "Sometimes being scared looks a lot like being sad." Jake, who had barely spoken during the entire shelter visit, suddenly said, "That's how I felt when we moved here, scared, but everyone thought I was just sad." Sarah and Robert exchanged surprised glances. It was the most their son had shared about his feelings in months. Minutes passed in silence. The family didn't approach Archie or try to force interaction. They simply waited, giving him space to decide. Then something extraordinary happened. Archie took one tentative step forward, then another. His nose twitched as he caught the family's scent. Emma slowly extended her hand, palm up. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're broken too." When Archie's cold nose touched her fingers, a single tear formed in the corner of his eye and rolled down his scarred face. The shelter had seen many emotional moments, but Maria had never seen a dog cry before. It wasn't physiologically what was happening, of course, likely just an eye irritation or response to stress, but the timing made it seem like something more. Archie moved closer, and Emma gently stroked his head. His body trembled, not with fear now, but with something that looked remarkably like hope. "What happened to his face?" Robert asked quietly. Maria shook her head. "We don't know his full story. He was found wandering near the highway. The vet thinks the scar is several months old." Jake scooted closer. "Can I pet him too?" "Very gently," his mother cautioned. Small fingers touched Archie's golden fur with impossible tenderness. For a moment, the dog stiffened. Then, gradually, impossibly, his tail moved. Just a slight twitch at first, then a more deliberate wag. "Mom, he's smiling," Jake exclaimed. And he was, in that way that retrievers do, mouth slightly open, eyes brightening. The transformation continued over the next 20 minutes. By the end of their meeting, Archie was sitting beside Emma, leaning against her leg as if he'd known her forever. "We'd like to adopt him," Robert said, looking at Sarah, who nodded. "Are you sure?" Maria asked cautiously. "He might need extra patience, special training." Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the shelter. "We know something about rebuilding trust, about starting over when it seems impossible." Outside the shelter windows, sunlight broke through the clouds, casting patterns across the room. Maria swallowed the lump in her throat. "There's some paperwork." As she gathered the forms, Maria watched through the office window as Archie stood in the center of his new family. His posture had changed, head higher, tail swaying in a steady rhythm. Robert knelt to sign the papers, then paused, pen hovering over the signature line. "You know," he said quietly to Sarah, "this feels like more than just getting a pet. Feels like putting our family back together," Sarah finished for him. "One piece at a time." The paperwork completed, the family prepared to leave. Maria knelt beside Archie one last time. "Good luck, boy," she whispered. The shelter doors opened wide and Archie stepped outside, not to the small exercise yard he'd visited briefly each day, but to the actual world. He stopped, overwhelmed by the vastness of it. "Come on, Archie," Emma called. "We're going home." The morning sun touched his scarred face and Archie moved forward. One step, then another, each more confident than the last. In the shelter parking lot, Robert opened the car door. Archie paused briefly at this new threshold, then jumped in, turning in a circle before settling between Emma and Jake. As the car pulled away, Archie looked back at the shelter one last time. The building that had been his entire world for 37 days grew smaller in the distance. That night, in the Miller's apartment, Archie curled on Emma's bed as she read him a story. In the hallway, Sarah and Robert watched silently. "He's the first one to sleep through the night since we moved," Sarah whispered, nodding toward Jake, who had fallen asleep on the floor beside Archie earlier. Robert slipped his arm around his wife's waist. "Maybe we needed him as much as he needed us." 6 months later, the Millers moved into a small house with a fenced yard. Emma had made the honor roll at her new school. Jake had joined a local soccer team. Robert's health had stabilized, and Sarah had found part-time work she enjoyed. And Archie? The scar on his face remained, but the wounds inside had healed. He no longer flinched at sudden movements or cowered during thunderstorms. Instead, he greeted each family member with enthusiastic joy, raced through sprinklers with the children, and slept peacefully at the foot of their beds. Two broken souls, a family and their dog, finding in each other the missing pieces needed to become whole again. For Archie and the countless others like him, all it takes is one family, one decision, one act of love to transform a life from forgotten to cherished. And sometimes, in saving another, we end up saving ourselves. If you enjoyed, then watch our next video shown on screen.